If you do see Dr. Hill calling in, it'll be from Alabama, North Alabama, if he doesn't use a name. So if you would, whenever he calls, please patch it in. So we're going to have about the first half hour just be the four of us, and then we'll allow other callers to do a Q&A if that's okay with you guys.
Okay.
All right, then.
Good.
We are now live streaming on YouTube, and I'm going to start the recorder here on TalkShoe.
TalkShoe. Recorded live.
And gentlemen, the show
Good
is
evening,
yours.
everyone. All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the first discussion through TalkShoe and YouTube Live of the Balk right and the rise of future white ethno-states. I'm your co-host for this program, Billy Roper, and I have a distinguished panel of guests who are going to be joining us this evening for this live discussion of the future of our people here in North America. You know, I want to first define what I mean by balkanization. You've heard the term thrown around a lot over the last couple of years, especially as the nation and our society becomes more and more polarized and divided. But a lot of people wonder what that means. Balkanization comes from the Balkans, a region which you might be familiar with because of the relatively recent Yugoslavian civil war. And I believe that a similar future is coming to the United States of America. Balkanization, as a political term, simply means the breakup of a multicultural or heterogeneous country into smaller, more homogeneous nation states. For example, if the United States of America, as a multiracial society, was to break up into smaller racial ethno-states, that would be an example of balkanization. The result of the 1990s Yugoslavian Civil War is another example of balkanization, as was the dismantlement of the Ottoman Empire by Kemal Ataturk. And when we talk about balkanization, obviously the term Balk right, which I coined very recently, refers to those of us on the hard right of the American political spectrum who believe that civic nationalism is not an answer, libertarianism is not an answer, even pure white nationalism in and of itself is not the answer. We've, I guess, matured and graduated past that into the phrase I give to it is the Balk right, because we sincerely believe that, you know, to paraphrase Nietzsche, what cannot fly must fall, and what is falling we should still push and say fall faster. We believe that the collapse of this multiracial empire is an inevitability, and while we may disagree to some extent on how that will occur, and we may even disagree on exactly what the future after that will hold, the reality is we have much more in common than we do as differences. Now, I don't claim to have invented the theory, even though I coined the phrase Balk right. Pastor Richard Butler created the Butler Plan. Thomas Chittum wrote a very good book called Civil War II back in the 1990s. David Lane wrote a book called KD Rebel, and there are many others who paved the way and came before me. And in 2015, I wrote a book called The Balk, and I updated this year with a book called Ethnostate, basically looking at demographic trends and saying that the balkanization of America, the breakup of this multiracial empire, the collapse of the United States is inevitable. But I'm not the only person, certainly not even the most prominent voice, to share that opinion about America's future and our people's destiny. With us this evening, hopefully, will be Dr. Michael Hill, who is the chairman of the League of the South. And as a Southern nationalist, he has now become more, I would say, of a white nationalist. And gentlemen, I hope that if I, incorrectly mischaracterize your positions or your beliefs, that you'll correct me. But Dr. Michael Hill is one of the leaders of the hard right, and it's one of the things that he and I have in common. And I think that Mr. Covington certainly shares this as well. And if I may venture to say, Mr. Kawczynski, we are hard rightists. We are not civic nationalists. Mr. Tom Kawczynski actually was the formulator of a plan for a white ethno-state in northern New England called New Albion. And now he's broadened his approach and has become the author of a new book, which we'll talk about in a moment. Mr. Harold Covington really needs no introduction. He is probably one of the most successful and skilled authors in the white nationalist movement, and his formulation of the Northwest Imperative as a continuation of the Butler Plan with the Northwest Front is legendary. I'm very honored to have him on the call this evening. And, of course, I I guess I've introduced myself pretty much. I'm Billy Roper. I'm the coordinator of the Shieldwall Network. And each of us will have an opportunity in a few minutes to share with the listeners and then with the callers our ideals and our visions for America's future. After the initial discussion, which will probably be about a half hour in length, we'll open the floor for other callers to have a Q&A and call in if they would like. But first of all, I wanted to make just a general statement. We are all, four of us, white patriots. We are all incidentally published authors, and we are all, I guess you would say, according to the alt-right terminology, we're all purity spiralers, and we're all believers in the inevitable collapse of multiracial democracy and the balkanization of America, followed by the rise of white ethno-states. And so for the sake of full disclosure, like I said, we may partially disagree on exactly where those ethno-states will be or will they will not be, and which of us, is correct, I guess only the future will tell, but that's one of the topics we'll explore tonight. But like I said, this is not a debate or an argument, as Dr. Hill and Tom and Mr. Covington and myself are all men, who I hope have a great deal of mutual respect. I certainly have a great deal of respect and admiration for all of the other men involved in this call, and I consider all of them to be my allies. And what we would like to do for our listeners' sake is to give everyone an opportunity to answer these two questions. And then, if they'd like to discuss it further, we can. But each in turn, I'd like to give the opportunity to have about 5 minutes to give their view. And the first question would be, what do you envision to be the most likely scenario for system collapse? And I'll elaborate to say that we all know that it's inevitable that multiracial democracy cannot fly. The United States is going to collapse, implode or explode, whether it's external or internal. And I would like to hear each of you please express your opinion on what you envision to be the most likely scenario for system collapse. And if Dr. Hill is on the line, Dr. Hill, I would like for you to go first for that question, if you would. Dr. Hill, are you with us?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If Dr. Hill is not with us yet, Mr. Kawczynski, would you like to go first for that question? What do you envision to be the most likely scenario for system collapse?
Thanks, Billy. First, before I answer that, let me just say thank you for inviting me to participate, and my respect to the other fine gentlemen on this call. You all have done much more than I have, and I give you full credit and respect for that. When I look at it, I tend to think, looking at it right now, the most likely vector for collapse is some sort of racial confrontation that comes out of maybe the Southwest or California, where you see the Latino Aztlan movement or something like that rise up and try to separate. If Trump manages to stay in power, the thing I've observed is that the radical left has a free pass to operate and do whatever they want in a way we on the hard right never do. And being that that is the greatest concentration of people, both of racial minorities as well as people who, subscribe to a Marxist ideology, I think it's very likely if problems arise, they may start out in the Southwest where the demographics are the most underwater, so to say. So I would look for that as a point of order. The other thing that's possible is that we would maybe get drawn into a very large war beyond our ability to sustain. I think, you look at Israel and how they've alienated everyone on the hard left and on the hard right, and given how our presidency, unfortunately, seems to be jumping down the line they've set for us, I can imagine something broader that might emerge where America is targeted for destruction because, in a global way of thinking about things, the idea of free and independent citizenry is a problem, and we are the vanguard of people who seek to sustain what white Western civilization created in America. So those are some thoughts I have about how it might happen, but I can imagine other ways as well and look forward to hearing what the other gentlemen think.
Thank you, Tom. And for our listeners, Mr. Kawczynski is the originator of the New Albion plan that would establish a white ethno-state in New England. But the next question will allow him to expound on that a little bit. Mr. Covington, Would you share your ideas with the listening audience, please, about what you envision to be the most likely scenario for system collapse in the United States?
Well, I've been pushing the Northwest migration for about 18 years now, and this was always based on the idea that some kind of breakup of the United States and political fragmentation of the North American continent, to include Canada, was inevitable, and I've always been talking about a Soviet Union-style breakup, and I still think that is very much on the cards. Is basically the multiracial society we have today is going to go prompt, critical, and disassemble, as they say, regarding a nuclear explosion, and move into its racial and ethnic separate interest groups, and so forth and so on. Now, before the Donald Trump phenomenon of 2016, I was pretty much convinced that it was going to be a combination of not only the social pressures that are inevitably generated by a multiracial society, where the pressure just builds up and builds up like it's in a pressure cooker and eventually something blows, that and also some kind of economic or financial collapse. What I always kind of pinned my hopes on was that basically the financial system and the general overall economy would degenerate into such a dog's dinner that the EBT system would fail. Now, this actually happened a few years ago in Georgia, and basically the first of the month rolled around, and all those computer-generated welfare checks, for some reason, didn't come through to all the various, monkoids and illegal aliens' bank accounts. And for a couple of days there, things got pretty tense because the homeboys couldn't go down to the Quickie Mart and buy their, Twizzlers and Purple Drank and whatnot and their wine. And so any breakdown on the welfare system or breakdown of the welfare system would cause immense and very immediate problems for the system, because we have this huge dependent population of non-whites in this country. Blacks, illegal aliens of various stripes, third worlders of various stripes, you know the drill. And they are, in many cases, literally dependent on the government for their subsistence. And if that subsistence ever breaks down, they're going to be out in the streets rioting in very short order. So that was what I always figured would happen. And that still is very much a possibility. But in combination with that, now we have this business with Donald Trump. The liberal left, progressive left, the Team Soros, whatever you want to call it, has been driven, I think, literally insane, as in not in their right minds, by this whole phenomenon of Donald Trump. Now, let me make it clear. I am not on the Trump train. I have not drunk the Trump Kool-Aid. I have very, very grave doubts about him. I always did. Before the election, I always said that I would like to have seen a lot more Huey Long and a lot less P.T. Barnum, man. And so he is not one of us. He is pro-Israel. His head up is so far up Israel's ass that his nose is brown. And, he's got, for the first time in history, we've got Jews living in the White House. And so Trump is not one of us. But the fact is that he is hated to the point of madness by the left, by the Hillary Clinton faction of the Democratic Party, by all of the little various fragments of the identity politics tendencies that make up the Democratic Party and the liberal movement, and so forth and so on. And if you follow the liberal blogosphere, as I do, on Salon and Huffington Post, you'll see these people are losing it over Trump, and they are just determined to overthrow him in some way or another. Right now, they're looking for a quasi-legal coup d'etat in the form of impeachment, and this is why the November midterm elections are going to be even more vicious than 2016, because in order to do that, they've got to get the Democratic majority in the House and the Democratic majority in the Senate to convict. If that fails, I genuinely believe that they will attempt some sort of assassination of Trump. But what I'm getting at here is that in addition to possible economic collapse or collapse of the welfare system, there's going to be a political upheaval and St. Vitus's dance as the deep state, the Obama leftovers, and this is still very much Obama's America, and the Clintonites and the feminists and the organized bugger boys and all this sort of stuff, Black Lives Matter, blah, 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 just convulse in an attempt to make sure that Donald Trump does not finish his first term. All us sassy white boys done backsassed Lady Hillary and refused to vote her into her coronation in 2016, and we have to be punished for that. We can't be allowed to choose a president. And again, despite all his warts, that is how Donald Trump is perceived. And so in order to punish us, they have to show us that we don't get a president. We're not allowed to elect a president. And so they are going to tear themselves and quite possibly their system apart by attempting to overthrow Trump, just as these feminist bitches are now destroying the liberal support system with all this Me Too nonsense. So we have a combination here. It may well converge into a perfect storm of economic collapse when this present bubble bursts, as it will. The stock market is just insanely high, and history proves that what goes up must come down in the stock market. And combined with intense political upheaval and continuing fragmentation, continuing spiritual balkanization, as more and more this country is totally, completely polarized between what's left of the white majority and all the other identity groups. And all of this, like I say, may converge into a perfect storm that will create a not so much Weimar-type situation, but kind of like a October 1917 St. Petersburg in Russia situation where something is going to give, and I believe that at some point something will give, and as William Butler Yeats said, things will fall apart and their center cannot hold. And I've babbled for a while, so I'll shut up now. But basically that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Covington. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world, the blood-dimmed tide unfurls, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned, right?
Something
Exactly.
like that.
Yes, sir. And I don't know if Dr. Hill is on the line yet, but I will.
Yes, I am.
My turn. Oh, you are? You're Dr. Hill? Okay.
Yeah, I'm here.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. We are discussing the question, and if you'd like to take about 5 minutes to answer, you can go ahead and go first. I will go last. That way I can maybe plagiarize some of your responses. But no, the question that we are discussing is what do you envision to be the most likely scenario for system collapse? When we think about the collapse of the United States of America and multiracial democracy, there's an opportunity for future white ethnic states. So what would you say is the most likely scenario for system collapse?
Well, I've been thinking about this for many years, and I listened to the previous, Mr. Covington, I think, mentioned something about the economic side of it, and I've always thought that was certainly a good possibility. Although I have a friend who is an economist who said, don't underestimate the ability of these people to keep holding this system together with chewing gum and baling wire and whatever other tricks they have. So they have done that for quite some time. But I just think that the racial tensions and the tension between what I call the common majority, people who in this country are still basically at least nominally Christian in their practices and their culture, against people who threw out any sense of morality a long time ago if they ever had it to start with. And obviously I think that as the demographics keep changing in favor of the dark-skinned people who are coming in and the Jews who are bringing them in, I think a lot of white folks are going to finally realize that their offspring, children and particularly grandchildren, don't have much of a future as a minority, a hated minority in a country that their ancestors founded. And I think that they will be forced by circumstance to choose a side. And I've always thought that if you take out the middle ground and don't give anyone that comfortable place to stand and make them take one side of the fence or the other, that the sooner that happened, the sooner we would be, or the closer we would be to solving our problem. And I do think that there's going to be a conflict. I think that there's a good chance of open civil war in the United States within the next 2 to 3 years, maybe. I just think things have gotten that bad, and I do think that the war has already started, and I've said that in a number of speeches I've given, and only one side is fighting right now, and that's not the white folks. And if you look at something as common as the black on white crime statistics, particularly violent crime, you'll see that there's a one-sided war in the streets already against our people. I have, being a Southerner, I'm more aware of it in my part of the country than others. But our women folk, and men either for that matter, can't walk in downtown Memphis or New Orleans or Atlanta or gosh, you name the city. We've lost control of our cities, and they're war zones. I mean, anti-white, no-go zones for people like us. And if you've lost your cities, and certainly I'm not discounting Chicago and, Philadelphia, New York, and I mean, not New York, but Chicago, Philadelphia, some of the other northern cities that I know less about. I know that you can't do that there either if you're a white man or woman, certainly. But I just think the war has already begun, and I think that there's going to be some sort of catalyst, some sort of spark that is finally going to set the tinderbox on fire, and it's not going to be able to be put out until it's settled one way or the other. And I'm certainly not advocating for this because anyone who's ever been in a war zone and taken part in a conflict like that realizes it's a serious matter, and people die and things get destroyed. Very serious, particularly when your family and friends and loved ones are in the actual war zone, which a lot of people here will be. So I'm not advocating it. I'm simply predicting that it's likely to happen. And I'm certainly, I think the discretion here is that people need to start preparing for it. We encourage our people in the League of the South to keep themselves in good physical shape, get training in self-defense techniques, including pistol and long gun training. Cooperate with your fellow chapter members or your neighbors or whoever realizes what dire straits we're in, and prepare for what we consider to be the inevitable. And I think that the way news travels and the way information is telescoped today, you could have one event, one incident, if you will, in anywhere, rural location, urban location. It doesn't make any difference. And it could travel all over the world in no time, and it could be the spark that sets everything ablaze. And I think we have to be aware of that, because I think the tension has ratcheted up to such a level that something that you wouldn't think on the surface would be that serious could be the spark that sets it all off. And I think sooner or later that spark will come. And I think a lot of people, despite a lot of us having been out there for a long time warning about these things, and a lot of people simply won't listen until all this is right on their doorstep. And I think it's coming. I think the more perceptive folks out there with eyes to see and ears to hear realizes, I guess you might say, the inevitable, although I really hate to use that term, but I think if anything was close to inevitable, I think this coming conflict is. And I've had a lot of people who say, I've seen what's going on in Southern Africa and has been going on over there since the 1970s, and seeing what's going on in Europe right now with the replacement of the population there by Africans and Middle Easterners, and even beginning to see the same happen here. And obviously, having dealt with the civil rights movement for the last half century, they've seen the handwriting on the wall about that. White people are under siege, and the old idea about, the only places anyone wants to see diversity and multiculturalism are in white countries is absolutely true. I mean, you don't see white folks trying to go and enrich African countries or Asian countries or Middle Eastern or South American countries. The traffic is all in the opposite direction, and it's very simple to me why it is, and that's the white man has created civilizations that's the envy of the world, that is the standard, and the dark-skinned races at the behest of the Jew, who is really the real enemy, are pushing these people onto us in order to destroy us. I think it's done out of bottom line out of sheer hatred of who we are. We white men have been synonymous with Christendom for 2,000 years, and Christendom is the Jews' big target, and it just so happens that the white man bears that image, and that's why we're under the gun, as it were, literally. And I think this whole threat of white genocide is real. A lot of people say, well, that's just hyperbole when you start talking about that. Yeah, they're trying to destroy our culture, our heritage, all the manifestations of our heritage, flags, memorials, monuments, songs, street names, school names. Everything is that has the bears the name or image of a Confederate, a Southerner, or now even a white man. Christopher Columbus, for example, is a target, and that's true. But it won't stop there, because I've said often, after the stone and the metal and the fabric, whatever these manifestations of our culture may be made out of, they're not going to stop there. They're coming for the flesh next, because we're the target. I mean, they don't hate those Confederate battle flags and statues of Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson, because they just don't happen to like that flag or those particular men. They hate everything that stands for in the current day, and that means us white folks. So I'm not very optimistic at all about the prospects of peace in this country, and a lot of people believe that, oh, this is America, that could never happen here. Hide and watch. It's coming, and I'm not prescient enough or smart enough to figure out exactly what's going to trigger it all, but I can see the handwriting on the wall, and what it's writing is not a pleasant message, and I just think we all need to steel ourselves as best we can for the coming conflict, because I think, as I said before, if there's anything that is close to inevitable, I think that's it, and I think it may be something that as odd as it is to hear, something that may be necessary, because you have two sides lined up here, and I think that they may be pretty much equal, or fairly so. And I think one has to win and one has to lose, because neither side can live with the other, because their ideas are antithetical to ours and vice versa. Their worldview will not fit with ours and vice versa. So somebody has to win and somebody has to lose. And we have seen what the left will do in the 20th century. I mean, communism was a leftist Jewish phenomenon, of course, and it killed probably at least 100 million people, or was responsible for that many deaths in the 20th century. And if you think those people have gone away, you're sadly mistaken. They're still here. They're still as ruthless and amoral as they were then, 100 years ago. And they will do the same thing if you let them. They will come back with a vengeance. And I shudder to think in this country what's going to happen. Not if, but when they come back into power. They are going to be itching to overturn everything that Donald Trump has done. And I agree with your previous fellow who was on, Mr. Covington, I believe, that Trump is not one of us, but he's a respite, I think, here, and we should be taking advantage of it. But he's hated by the left because he is viewed as one of us, even though he isn't, because he's a white man, white heterosexual, aggressive, sort of alpha male type. That's the kind they hate. But when they come back into power, they're going to have it in for everybody that they believe had anything to do with Donald Trump's being elected or being any way successful. And they're unlike the housebroken right, the GOP in America, they play for keeps, and I do respect them for that. I mean, I know that they're an enemy who would kill me, and probably all of us on here tonight, if they had the chance. But I do respect them for being that passionate about what they believe. It's time that people on the right did the same thing. So, you know, if they come back into power in 2020, you can expect them to come in full of hatred and full of a penchant, an appetite for destruction. I think
Absolutely.
I think that was a album title. Appetite for Destruction.
I refer to that as the coming revenge presidency of Kamala Harris. They're going to put up a woman of some kind. It'll either be Kamala Harris, this high yellow from California. It'll be Elizabeth Warren or Pocahontas, as she's called. Or this bimbo from New York, Kirsten Gillibrand. They have to somehow defeat Trump, and it has to be a woman that does it in their minds. And so, but I'm referring to that period that's coming in our history as the revenge presidency. And there is going to be a almost Stalinist purge of punishment of anybody who they viewed as assisting Trump in any way, or just basically us white boys who were backsassing him on the internet.
Yeah, exactly.
I agree completely.
And they do play for keeps, and as I said, I do admire them for that. It's time our side started playing for keeps, because this is a war, and this is a war to the death, and it's going to determine the future of Western civilization. And I think that is not hyperbolic to say that. I think these people are out to destroy what is left of Western civilization, and the architects of it, white men, are their main target. So we better damn well take it seriously. I have been, and I think people in my organization have, but we're just a small group compared to the population in general. So we just need to be waking people up.
Yes, sir, we certainly are. And hopefully this phone call will do a lot to awaken some of our people as well. For my part, I think a couple of things that our people need to be awakened to, if we could, is to the fact that there is not going to be a civic national solution to this problem, demographically and racially. We're not going to vote our way out of this mess. That train left the station a long time ago. And frankly, also, if I could expand on that further, I don't believe that we're going to take the whole country back in one piece, certainly not initially at least, like a compression nuclear explosion. We may eventually re-emerge and reconquer the entire continent, and I hope that's ultimately the case for our descendants. But I don't believe that we're going to either vote or through any kind of revolution, to use a pretty triggering phrase, take back the entire nation. I think that we're going to have balkanization. I agree 100% with the previous commenters. And it's wonderful, to have Dr. Hill and Mr. Kawczynski and Mr. Covington here to share their ideas. I am honored to be here in their presence. And my initial feeling about, what will create system collapse is, of course, none of us have a crystal ball. We're all seeing through a glass darkly. And it depends on so many external and internal factors that we're not sure. But one thing we are sure of, there have been lots of times in our history, all of us here on this call are old enough to remember the Cold War and how that worked out. And if you had told any of us, say in 1985, that the Soviet Union was going to collapse without a missile being fired and implode and balkanize and break up, if you told any of us in 1985 that, the Berlin Wall was going to come down without a shot being fired, we probably would have laughed and thought, no, that's why, we were raised as kids hiding under our desks in anticipation of a global thermonuclear war and mutually assured destruction. But it happened. And then, the Monday morning quarterbacks came out and saw that they, said that they saw it coming all along and it was always inevitable. History is full of immense changes, which no one could have predicted before they happened, or very few predicted, but then seemed in hindsight to have been inevitable. I believe that, we're really going to see the breakup and the balkanization of America, just as some people might not want to accept the fact that we can't vote our way out of this mess, and some people might not want to accept the fact that we're not going to take the country back. But as to how it will happen, my idea is that, like Mr. Kawczynski said, and like Dr. Hill, and also Mr. Covington said, like I said, take some of their ideas and add them to my own. If you look at the Southwest, the demographic changes in what the Mexicans there call La Reconquista de Aztlan, and you see the abdication of federal power by the federal government, where, for example, in sanctuary states, Washington, D.C. no longer has the will, apparently, to enforce its own authority on one of its states. And if that peppermint striped flag is ever taken down and replaced by, the eagle and snake banner, some Cinco de Mayo in L.A., and the federal government is not willing to step in and say no, slap them on the wrist, then that could be the trigger. I sincerely believe, I know that we are not violent revolutionaries, and anyone listening that thinks that that's the contrary is, sadly mistaken. They're not going to get any inflammatory rhetoric here out of us. But the reality is we may not start it. They may start it. The other side may start it. We may be counter-revolutionaries, and we may be the ones who finish it. So whether it's through the abdication of the federal government's power, through their lack of will to exercise it, or whether it's through the other side actually making a emboldened grab for territory, like the Reconquista of the Southwest, then none of us can tell exactly what will happen. It could be an external war. It could be an internal economic collapse. But, it's like a patient who is on life support in an intensive care unit who's had a stroke and a heart attack and terminal cancer and multiple amputations. And the doctors are gathered around the bed as, the heart monitor begins to flatline, wondering what the cause of death is. The cause of death may be one of several things, but the reality is multiracial democracy cannot fly. And what cannot fly must fall. And I think that members of the Balk right, we would agree that what cannot fly, we should still push and say fall faster. But I'm not sure what the future will hold either as far as a trigger crisis scenario. I do believe it's coming. And I believe that it may very well be something, one of those historical forces that we don't even have direct control over, but we will be able to tap into, ride the wave, and take opportunistic control over, and then for the benefit of our people, move forward in securing the existence of our people in the future for white children. And I know that's a goal that we all share. The second question that I would like to ask to each of you is one, and like I said at the beginning of the call, we all agree on 90% of the issues that we could possibly discuss. We all are published authors. We all are basically purity spiralers. We all are hard right. We all are in favor of the balkanization of America and the rise of white ethno-states. And the one point, perhaps, that we might have some minor contention on is what region of the country we might think is most likely to be the seedbed of future white ethno-states. And I believe there'll be multiple. My personal view, I'll talk about that in a moment. But with the understanding that this is not, of course, a debate or an argument, and my deep respect and admiration for each of you, compels me to make sure that we all understand that we're more or less on the same page, if not on the same paragraph. I would like to each of you, if you have about 5 minutes, to answer the question, what region of the nation, or the continent, if you will, what region of the continent do you most favor for a potential future white ethno-state, and why? What region do you most favor for a potential white ethno-state, and why?
All right, if I may go first, because I've got to get off probably
sure, go ahead.
Here in about 10 minutes. But obviously, as a Southerner, I have loyalty to my own part of the country. We're a distinct people with a distinct history and culture down here. And obviously, we have for long been inundated by an alien race since the very beginning. And obviously, we have that's been added to by immigration, legal and illegal, over the years. So we do down here have that demographic problem, but that is a little bit misleading, because if you look at where most of these non-whites are located in the South, it's in the urban kraals or enclaves, and it's in basically a crescent, which we call the Black Belt, that runs from east Mississippi through central Alabama, over into West Georgia, and up into South Carolina. And that's a very, very depressed former agricultural area that does not have very much political or geopolitical power at all in a situation like we're talking about here. So I really think that, if you had the federal government out of the picture and the Jew out of the picture, the white man in the South could reassert his control here very, very quickly. That shadow of the big white boss man down here is not very far in the shadows in certain areas, and that's why I've always told my fellow white Southerners, if you act like a white man, the Negroes are not going to bother you. I taught at a black college for 15, 16 years, and I've seen that. You walk in and you show them who's boss, they're not going to give you any trouble. And that's the way Southern Negroes basically still are. If the white man shows up and acts like a white man, he's not going to have any trouble. And a lot of people who are not Southerners don't realize that, but that vestige of the 19th century, early 20th century is still here. But even discounting those areas, the urban areas and the Black Belt, which is a rural agricultural area, the rest of the South is pretty much still in white hands. That's not to say that there's not some minority populations there, but they could be easily persuaded to leave or to, in the worst case scenario, behave themselves. But there are certain areas of the South in the Appalachia where you don't find hardly any non-whites. So the Appalachian redoubt, as we call it, North Georgia, North Alabama, Northeast Mississippi, most of East and Middle Tennessee, Kentucky, Western South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, West Virginia, that whole area there is a potential white ethno state right now. The only drawback to it is it doesn't have any seaports, and that's one of the geopolitical concerns that makes me hesitant to give up on a place like Alabama, my home state, or Georgia or Mississippi even though the demographic numbers there are not as good as the upland Appalachia South. But I think as a Southerner, and I've told people, I said we might not have the ideal area, but you have to understand the Southern psyche and mindset about this. If I have to die defending Alabama, the soil I was born and raised on, I'll do it because it's my home, and my home means something to me. I'm not running from it. Others can. That's their prerogative. My prerogative is to stay, and I know a lot of Alabamians and Tennesseans and Georgians, et cetera, who feel the same way. So we'll take a stand down here in the Southland, and we have a better situation that demographics would make it appear on the outside, just because of the location and the nature of the minority situation in our particular part of the world. So, I say that with bias and obviously prejudice because I'm a Southerner, but I'm just not giving up on my land. So that's pretty much what I have to say.
Thank you, Dr. Hill.
Sure.
Mr. Kawczynski, if I would ask you a question, what region of the nation do you most favor for a future potential white ethno state, and why? What would your response be, sir?
Well, let me start by agreeing with something that Dr. Hill said in his first comments, which was that, we're pretty evenly matched, if you think about it, between our side and their side. So my broader perspective on it is we're going to need different areas to stand up. I think the South is an area. I think the Northwest is an area. I think there are places in the upper Midwest that will be very good. And I am, of course, particularly fond of the far Northeast where I live. Now, to make the case for northern New England, we have 3 of the 4 whitest states in America. We have some of the smallest populations in terms of bringing in people of other races and ethnicities. And most importantly, in the current time, we economically are set up in such a way where we don't have the same natural pressures like how should I say this, big-scale agriculture that will bring in migrant labor. New England, for its problems with being a little left-leaning, didn't go ahead for the whole sort of Walmart strip mall thing that destroyed a lot of small towns. So if you were to live up in Maine, let's say where I live, what you would find is lots of small towns that are economically viable for people to live in today, not just tomorrow, and that are usually upwards of 95% white. I think that's a real opportunity, and I think one of the challenges we've had in the movement is the white flight model, where we try to convince people to go somewhere else, is really problematic because we live in an age where people are so specialized with what they do for work that it's very hard for a lot of people to go and just be somewhere unless they can go ahead and integrate to some extent within the existing economy. Being up here in New England, we can do that in a lot of ways where we are close enough to exist and have the resources we need to compete within the national framework while it still holds together. But we also have the ability to very quickly separate ourselves and to be self-sufficient because we have family farms, because we're decentralized into small towns in many ways. And we have the advantage of having plenty of natural resources. We have a very small federal presence here, which I think is a problem for people in the South and the Northwest, frankly. We only have one very small naval base up here for shipbuilding. So we tend to think up here in Maine, New Hampshire, and whatnot, we will be able to get away very quickly. We have excellent gun laws, a high degree of community cooperation, and the biggest problem we have, frankly, up here in northern New England is that we have a lot of white people who've never been exposed to the problems of diversity, and so they virtue signal like crazy. But what I've discovered living up here, and this applies to myself as someone who moved up here from Pennsylvania, is that there are a ton of people moving from the mid-Atlantic and other points up into Maine, up into New Hampshire, and very quietly settling their families into these small towns with the understanding that a time is coming where we might want to be somewhere that is more secure, where we can trust people. And one thing I believe very strongly is that we are in the respite time that Trump has given us, and that the left will attack very viciously given the opportunity. We need to use this time to organize our strength in all areas where our people are, get people ready for what's happening, what will happen if someone like Kamala Harris comes to power, because I agree with Mr. Covington, that's likely what we're going to be looking at, and not give them the opportunity to take power back before we are ready to do something, because if we allow this state to slide into their hands after the Trump time, they are going to go ahead and use that against us. So that's my case for northern New England.
Thank you, Mr. Kawczynski. Mr. Covington, what region of the nation do you most favor for a future white ethno state, and why?
Well, obviously, since the name of our group is Northwest Front, we favor the Pacific Northwest. There are a variety of reasons for that, but the first thing I need to explain is that, again, with all due respect to these other gentlemen, our thinking about the whole global biopolitical situation is somewhat different. There is a natural tendency among Americans, I think, being very conservative people, to want to kind of restore the old ways and the good old days, et cetera, and I get that. There's certainly nothing wrong with it, but we try to take a little bit of a longer view. The principle behind the Northwest Imperative and the coming Northwest American Republic is to create a white homeland for all white people the world over, everyone from white South Africans to Australians to Europeans who are now being pushed out of their own homelands and so forth and so on. This is a kind of a bad parallel, but it's apt. We are kind of white Zionism. We're trying to do what, for our own people, what the Jews did with Israel. And so that's a little bit of a different approach there. And as far as the locality, first off, there's moral reasons. The Northwest has already been, were sanctified by the blood of martyrs. The Weaver family, Gordon Call, Bob Matthews and the Men of the Order. People tend to forget that there already has been one attempted insurrection here in the Northwest in the 1980s. Didn't get very far, but it might kind of serve as our psychological Easter rising. And as far as the land itself, the land for our white homeland, first off, must be extensive. Because we're going to have a lot of Lehmans around, because there are going to be white people fleeing, in some cases literally fleeing, to the safety of the homeland, and we're going to have some place to put them. There have to be resources. We must be able to create within the homeland what's known as an autarkic economy, completely self-contained, because the first thing that's going to happen is we will be hit with every conceivable sanction possible economically. We will be cut off from the rest of the world for at least some time, either through what remains of the American tyranny or through the general chaos. And we need resources. We need to be able to grow our own food. That can be done here in the Northwest, in the land that we've kind of staked out, which is 3 states: Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Montana west of Interstate 15. And we can grow our own food there, everything from vegetables, God knows, Idaho can grow potatoes, cattle, and you name it. So there would be no risk of literal physical starvation like the poor bastards in Gaza have to put up with, and so forth and so on. Now, the second thing we will need is material resources. We've got all of that here: timber, mining of just about everything that we would possibly need. We've even got some coal reserves. They've never been really worked that much, but because most of the coal has always been in Kentucky, West Virginia, places like that, Pennsylvania. But we have got here also the infrastructure, a highway system. Once our larger cities can be cleaned out and a white society established, we will have all of the facilities that we need, everything from manufacturing to infrastructure, everything. We've got a couple of nuclear power plants. So this would be a place where we could actually establish a homeland physically. Now, I sound like an author just plugging my books. I have written 5 novels about the coming Northwest independence movement, wherein I explain a lot of this stuff in much greater, in much greater detail than I can here. And because I'm going into a coughing fit here, I'm going to have to sign off on that. So go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Covington. While Mr. Covington recovers, then
I'm just damn tickle in the throat. Yeah.
All right. Are you okay, or would you like to take
no. Okay. But basically, the Northwest, frankly, is also a place where there is a lot of organic migration, as Mr. Kawczynski has mentioned. We call them organic migrants. There was one, when I first lived in Seattle, there was a kind of a joke going around that half the people in town were born in California. And people come here. God bless it. Okay. People come here for racial reasons already, but they would cut off their own ghoulies rather than admit that is why they're coming here. So there actually is a Northwest migration taking place. And so we're actually taking advantage of an existing trend. So anyway, I'll let some of the other guys talk now.
Thank you, Mr. Covington. And I do encourage everyone to read Mr. Covington's books. They're available online through Amazon.com and through other fine internet retailers. He is, as I said earlier at the beginning of the show, one of the finest authors in the white nationalist movement. And
one thing I'd like to mention real quick, if you guys will email me at nwnet@earthlink.net, NWNET@earthlink.net, I will send free PDF copies of my novels to anyone who wants them.
You can't get more generous than that. Free is as good as it gets, absolutely. Yeah. And his books are valued at any price, so we certainly appreciate that. For my part, I want to thank those who have already responded. And like I said, this is not a debate or an argument. We're grown men, and we may not agree 100% of the time, but I think we find a lot of commonality, a lot of really shared ground. I happen to live in northern Arkansas, and so the area that I refer to as Ozarkia is that area of northern Arkansas and southern Missouri, which is overwhelmingly white. Just to give you an example, the county that I live in is 96% white. The state Senate district in which I live is 95% white. We have an area of 50 contiguous counties around my area, which are over 90% white, and that is actually increasing rather than decreasing. What I actually observed in my book, The Balk, which I wrote in 2015 using census records and demographic stats, is that people are indeed indulging in white flight, whether we like it or not. Whites are largely moving out of black areas as they become blacker and moving to whiter areas. And that happens not just on neighborhood or city level, but on a regional level, even a state level. I find that in my area, a lot of people are moving from Louisiana and Mississippi and from southern Arkansas here into northern Arkansas. And they have euphemisms about why they're moving. They say they're moving for the lower crime rates or the better schools, but we all know why. The problem is that sometimes they need to be kept from indulging in the white guilt syndrome of trying to make it into the kind of liberal place they left. But that aside, we all need to be persons of influence in our community, because when we have the collapse of this federal system, it will be our local communities which actually decide who gets to eat and who gets eaten. So here in what I refer to as Ozarkia, in this overwhelmingly white area, it's kind of like Switzerland. It has a lot in common with another seedbed ethno-state that I really like. I call it Franklin. It's what Dr. Hill referred to as the area of eastern Tennessee and southern Appalachia, which has a similar demographic base and also similar topography. There's something about the mountains that always attracted our people as a refuge and bastion. But I don't think that our futures in the upper South, which are attracting so many people, so many white people from the deep South, will necessarily be landlocked. I believe that there is a demographic trend to create a potential channel from our area directly down into northern Texas, which has deep water ports and which is still overwhelmingly white as well and probably will remain so. So my point about Ozarkia and the upper South being potential seedbeds for white ethno-states is that white people, are already moving here from darkening areas in the Black Belt as their states become more and more black, as blacks move from the Midwest and from the northeastern cities back into the deep South. The whites are responding by moving out to the upper South, especially places like here. And these white people, some of them are aware of why they move and don't have to be reminded. As these areas actually become more white by percentage, then there's a lot of resentment to the people that they left behind, and we're hoping that that channel to North Texas will be available. We also could see actually these white ethno-states combining Franklin in East Tennessee and Ozarkia here in North Arkansas, for example, would literally only need to reduce by siege Nashville and Memphis to join together and have a large white band all across the upper South of overwhelmingly white territories. The 3rd Congressional District, where Rick Tyler is running in East Tennessee, is 85% white, just to give you an example. So there's a lot of potential, I think, here in the upper South, which is experiencing a lot of white flight from the deep South. And, like I said, in 2015 I wrote The Balk. And this year, 2018, I wrote an update to it called Ethno-State. And Ethno-State takes those demographic trends and those census stats and extrapolates forward into the future, showing that the upper South will continue to become more and more white, as the deep South, I'm afraid, unfortunately, might tend to go in the opposite direction. As far as being landlocked, which is a major concern for a lot of people, I understand, Austria and Switzerland do pretty well without a lot of ports. But even so, I do believe that we'll have an opportunity to have those deep water ports in North Texas. And if I were to choose, I would personally prefer to have access to ports that would face our cousins in Europe, because I believe that once America balkanizes and the federal government is no longer in control, the liberal pressure on our European cousins and their countries would dissipate, and the nationalist parties in Europe could very well rise to power. So we could very well find ourselves having partners there. The first American Revolution didn't really get off the ground until the French and even, the Prussians and the Poles helped out, and probably wouldn't have succeeded without them. We may find that, as David Lane wrote in Katie Rebel, from Russia with love really comes true. But be that as it may, our European cousins may regain control of their own destinies in their own nations without the force of the liberal U.S. government on top of them, forcing them to have their borders open. And if that's the case, we won't be facing those European cousins as potential allies and trading partners rather than facing Asia, in my personal opinion. But that being the case, we can agree to disagree on this minor point, and I do wish success to all white ethno-states because ultimately I believe we will retake the entire continent for our people. I want to remind the listeners that we're going to be accepting phone calls. If you have a Q&A, please remain respectful of everyone that you'd like to communicate with. And, Rich, do we have any callers that are waiting to come on the line?
Actually, they are all online.
I'm on here, Billy.
Hello, Rich.
Alan.
Hi, Rich. Do we have any callers who are on the line? All right. I'm not sure that Rich is on the line. If someone is able to let callers in, if there's anyone who's currently on the line waiting, I know that they probably are trying to call in.
I had my mic muted.
Okay, Rich.
Yeah, there are several callers on right now.
Okay, would you let a caller in, and we'll be happy to answer the question.
Well, anyone who wants to talk can speak right up because they're online right now.
Okay. Who would like to have a question for our board?
Hey, can you hear me, Billy?
Yes, sir, I can.
Hey, it's Alan. How you doing, bud?
Hi, Alan. How are you?
Good, man. I'm just calling in just mainly to listen, but I wanted to say hi to everybody that's on here. And appreciate you guys coming together to do this show.
Thank you, Alan. Really good to hear from you again, man.
Yes, sir.
All right. Alan, is there anyone else who would like to have a question for our board or make a comment?
I would like to make a comment to everybody. We're getting a lot of background noise from somebody's microphone. So please be aware of the fact that the noises you're making while your mic is hot is coming through to everyone. So.
Sounds kind of like an adding machine to me.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on there.
Massage doesn't have the usual top crew in today.
All right. Do we have any other callers on the line?
I'm just now tuning in, Billy. So I didn't. I thought it was going to be at 8 o'clock. I guess it was earlier, but I just called in, so I haven't heard what's been going on, so I can't really comment.
All right. Well, we're glad that you called in, and it is being recorded, and so everyone who did not have an opportunity to listen to the first part of the show will be able to listen to the recording through what's currently on the YouTube live channel. I know there is chat going on through the TalkShoe function. I believe also there's chat going on, live chat through the YouTube live feed channel, being monitored by Stephen. But if anyone else is on the line that would like to have a question for myself or for Mr. Covington or for Mr. Kawczynski or for Dr. Hill, they're welcome to voice that question now.
Well, I have one.
I got a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead.
This is Pat. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Sure can.
There's y'all familiar with this the internet? I mean, it's kind of stupid. I mean, QAnon, Q as he's known, and it's a big rave, and he's supposed to be the military intelligence. And so there just might be a possibility that the military is sympathetic to us, and because I mean, whoever gets the military wins in the end. And Jerome Corsi said that QAnon was military intelligence. So so far, they're doing a lot of work. Brandon, I think it was the guy who was the guy that set up the surveillance. He was in charge of the internet, the surveillance. Not that, but there's a lot of deep state people that are with us, and of course there's nobody in Congress. Congress is empty. There's nobody standing up. They all
I agree.
denounced
Absolutely. I agree
Well, let's
completely.
go
And I think I agree completely. That's a very good question. For my part, I'll go first if you guys don't mind. I personally believe that when the United States government balkanizes, that the federal troops will as well. There are a lot of U.S. Army units that are so racially mixed, they would have to be locked down on base and painstakingly, patiently segregated. Otherwise, their officers would get fragged. I guess, potentially foresee where the federal government might try to use, Hispanic troops to keep order in white neighborhoods and white troops to keep order in black neighborhoods. But to segregate out those troops and those units would require locking them down on their base and basically overhauling the entire, federal military, which I don't think they would have the time to do to react to what would probably be coming. So I am not one of those who thinks that the federal government would remain monolithically in control of its troops or its armed forces. I believe that just as happened in the Yugoslavian Civil War, you'd see that a lot of those U.S. troops would probably go home to take care of their families. And they might, go brigand. Some of them might become warlords, but for the most part, they wouldn't remain intact units. I will ask Mr. Covington, what is your opinion about that?
Well, during the 8 years of Obama made a lot of shifting and he fired a lot of generals. He replaced them with his own people. It was pretty obvious what he was doing was purging the upper echelons of the military in order to create a politically reliable military, one that would, frankly, fire on the American people if necessary. How successful he was in that, I don't know. I also know that the military has historically kept certain crack units for the times when things really need to be done, like the Delta Force and various special ops units and so forth and so on, that were exempted from all of the diversity and affirmative action requirements. And so the result is that those elite units are still very largely white. And so the way that again, I'm kind of getting back to my novels here. I personally believe that if there is ever a prolonged insurrection, in my books I talk about an IRA-style campaign, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to treat the whole problem as a criminal issue, and they're going to try to use normal police forces. One reason, by the way, they've been militarizing the police like hell, and so they can pretend that everything is all right, and these so-called white supremacist insurrectionists are really just a bunch of redneck criminals. And when that doesn't work, and of course it would be our responsibility to make sure it didn't work, and basically any insurrectionist movement in the United States is going to have to first of all survive the first year in order to be taken seriously. But when that didn't work, they would probably fall back on the same thing that the British used in Ireland and in other colonial situations. They would in Ireland they were called the Black and Tans, and later on the B Specials. In Northern Ireland, they would create these special units of basically thugs, the purpose of which would be to go into white communities, terrorize them, and so forth and so on. I don't believe that in most cases there would really be a massive military effort to suppress any such insurrection, only for the reason that the United States military right now is spread so thin across the world. Bear in mind that the American empire has these huge commitments. I mean, would they, for example, withdraw all the troops from Afghanistan and Iraq and Yemen in the Middle East in order to come back and put out brush fires here in the United States? This is another reason I mentioned in one of my books. This very thing was talked about in the brigade as I had my insurrectionists sitting there planning all this out. The Northwest is so big that they can't really put a soldier behind every Douglas fir. And so, yeah, it would get hairy. But now, as far as the idea of a military coup against the government, I am not totally sure that anything like that could happen, specifically because of the years of political meddling and reshaping and diddling around and the general corruption of the military, just like every other American institution. I don't know how many of you guys have actually served in the American military. I did. And, of course, this was many years ago, but even in those days it was obvious that the level of sheer incompetence and corruption and mismanagement and confusion in military decisions would definitely, actually go in our favor. So, and some of the white soldiers, yes, would defect. They would go over to the other side. But I think really the immediate problem that any white attempt at seizure of political power is going to come up against will be the police. And in my Northwest novels, I had my guys trying to reach a situation where they really didn't have too much trouble with the police because half of the police were afraid of them and the other half were sympathetic. But frankly, I just don't see a military coup or a deep state coup in favor of us as a likelihood, as witness what the deep state is doing to Donald Trump right now.
Absolutely. Well, I don't know if Dr. Hill is still on the line. Dr. Hill, if you are, would you like to go next? Dr. Hill may have had to leave. He did say that he had probably a previous appointment that he had to go to. Mr. Kawczynski, would you like to weigh in on the question of what you think the future role of the U.S. military may be in the idea of a balkanization or the breakup of the United States?
Well, I'm going to take that question slightly broader because I agree with Mr. Covington that I don't think the military is as likely to be the problem as the police, and what I mean by that is federal law enforcement and the various assembly of three-letter agencies. But I also think we have a very unique opportunity that has been created by Trump's presidency, where not only do we have a respite where at least the titular state isn't coming after us, but that we have the opportunity to maybe see this war that's coming be started by the other side. And the advantage of that, say Trump gets elected again in 2020, despite California voting 70% against him. Of course, we know there's a lot of illegals caught up in that number. You might actually see moves on the left toward an insurrection. And if they start the fighting, the real benefit is then we don't have to deal with the police state coming after us from the very beginning. Now, I won't pretend that they'll be on our side because I don't think that's the case, but it makes a huge difference in terms of popular opinion because as soon as the fighting starts, my own belief is that you're going to have two sides very quickly develop, which are going to be roughly right, conservative, white, rural, Christian, against people who are minority, left, Marxist, urban. You can figure out the categories. And the minute people start shooting, people will realize real quick where they need to be or they'll be dead. And I think when we think about that scenario, the important thing, and this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, is if we are well prepared in our areas, whatever they are, we will be the authority figures people will come to because we will be the ones who have done the logistic planning and the networking to pull things together. Much of what I do up here in northern New England is less prominent in the efforts of these fine gentlemen, but I very quietly network towns where we might have 20 or 30 people in a town just sitting there in a case of high preparedness. Because the other part that I think we all need to remember is that each of us live in a region that is attracting white migration because of the problems we face with diversity, and that we all will be targeted by external forces as well as the internal forces, the police state. So the more areas we have that are viable in terms of fighting, the more likely one or more emerge. And I think that's a really important point that, we need to make sure we work together and take advantage of that organic migration that Dr. Hill and Mr. Covington spoke of, because that way, when things go down, maybe those military assets will migrate to us. And I think that's a good way to look at the problem.
Absolutely.
Can I comment, Billy?
Yes, sir, yeah. Absolutely. Go ahead.
Is that me?
Yeah, go ahead, Alan. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just excellent points from both callers, but I just wanted to work off of something that Harold Covington said, and that's the basic disorganization, right, of our current military with all the multiculturalism that's going on. I mean, you got soldiers out there doing gang tags over in Afghanistan and all this other crazy stuff, right? All that is evidence of a military that's basically disorganized and has lost discipline. And that's why our military, in large part, has started to outsource, to all these outfits like Blackwater or whatever, over there in the Middle East, and they're training these people. And I've been saying this for years. They didn't call out our National Guard, National Guard, to go over and do door-to-door combat in foreign countries for no reason, right? And I believe it was because they were training them for the potential to have to do that here at home. But in addition to that, where you can't get American soldiers, particularly white soldiers, who are grounded in constitutional rights, et cetera, to come and attack American citizens, you can certainly get these modern-day janissaries, to move in, and basically they're mercenaries, and they'll use them. Believe me, they'll use them. So that's my comment on that. I was just hanging on to that from what Harold said.
Yeah, well, I actually got into that, like I say, in my novels. I had, I call it FATPO, F-A-T-P-O, the Federal Anti-Terrorist Police Organization. As I said, in this fictional scenario, they resembled the Irish Black and Tans, and in Northern Ireland, what's called the B Specials. And rather than attempt a full-scale military occupation of the Northwest, what they did was they sent in these special units of, in fact, in one of my novels, my NVA men tangled with some Blackwater guys, so actually two of them. And so, that's a very likely scenario. What I'm getting at is that for a variety of political and logistic and other reasons, I am not convinced, I may be wrong, but I'm not convinced that in the event of some kind of actual serious attempt to separate part of the North American continent from either the Canadian or the Washington Zionist regimes, they would respond with a full-scale military invasion and 82nd Airborne dropping out of the sky and all this sort of stuff, because I don't think they can anymore. I think one of the things that have been demonstrated, by the past, 20 years of experience in the Middle East is that American military power is no longer top dog. They are not really capable of defeating a bunch of little brown men with AK-47s and a couple of magazines. I don't know if anybody's noticed, I know most Americans don't, but we have not actually won a war since the end of World War II. Unless you want to count little, pissant countries like Panama and Grenada, which is, which doesn't count. But really, I mean, we haven't won a war in almost 70 years.
Yeah, exactly.
If I can interject
say
just
something?
one thing real fast here. I
Sure.
just want to say one thing. Another thing that occurs to me is in the Balk scenario that we're talking about, most federal resources necessarily are going to have to be devoted to cities, and it gives a real opportunity for asymmetric warfare to be incredibly effective. We all understand the logistics networks of the United States, where 95% of the food in those cities comes from over 150 miles away, and that there's only a 72-hour supply in any given city. So when you see those highways get cut, those bridges get blown up, and you see the truckers refuse to travel, the government's going to get drawn very quickly into the different cities of the different regions. And I think when we look at what's going to be happening, as long as they kind of get stuck pinned down there, we will have a lot of space and time with which to operate in all of our various rural regions, whether they be in Appalachia or in the Rockies.
May I comment on the military issue?
Absolutely. Sure, go ahead. Who's this?
Oh, yeah, this is Zachary from West Virginia.
Hi, Zachary. Good to hear from you. Yes, please do. Before you do, I just want to say one thing that Mr. Covington and I agree on absolutely as far as the use of specialized troops. In my Hasten the Day trilogy novels, I wrote about similar events coming, during the breakup of America, where you have perhaps National Guard units trying to enforce military police rules on the civilian population, but then fragmenting because they simply didn't have the logistical support any longer from their central commands or supplies to maintain their campaigns. But absolutely, Zach, go ahead. What do you think about the future use of the American military in a balkanization situation?
Well, I can at least speak for the enlisted side from the infantry and cavalry side of things. It's very, they're very sympathetic. I mean, out of probably the 15 guys we had, at least 6 were skinheads before they joined the military. And then even after I got out of the military, I traveled up to Unite the Right with another guy I was in with, and we ran into 5 guys that lived in our barracks alone there. And when the whole war in Afghanistan, I mean, I really think it's more of an issue of our rules of engagement. And I mean, because besides, in the combat side, there's hardly any non-whites. All the non-whites are mechanics or just desk jobs, and they're just, I mean, pretty much diversity promotions, and that's where they go, and that's where they go into.
Thank you, Zach. Well, that is an insider's view of today's current U.S. military. We appreciate that contribution. Are there any other callers? Oh, thank you, Zach. Are there any other callers on the line who have another question for our board?
Yeah, this is Taylor from Memphis.
Hi, Taylor. Good to hear from you. Taylor is a member of the Showall Network. Good to hear from you, Taylor.
Well, thanks for having me. I'd like to respond to your earlier question about, how the balkanization would begin. And I think in states, Democrat strongholds and anti-gun states where there's strict gun laws and, emphasis on a diversity policy, that they may wish to take children from white homes that they believe are racist and believing that, that they are in a unloving environment and put them.
I'm sorry to interrupt here, but if you read my novels, in my fictional revolt in the Northwest, it begins with when something called "It Takes a Village" comes and tries to take away the family of a white pagan family named Singer in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, because they've learned that the Singers are reading their children, Norse mythology as bedtime stories, and the entire community, this was a very popular man, the entire community finally has had enough, and they rise up, and all of a sudden the U.S. Marshals are getting fired on from all the windows in the neighborhood and so forth and so on. But, yeah, that is already happening in various social services organizations in the country. We had some of our people, this was some months ago, had to depart the state of California rather rapidly because social services came nosing around, hearing that they were raising their baby as a racist or whatever. And I don't want to get into details about that, but it does happen, and it will happen. Yeah, we're a lot of the things that I've written about in my novels, I'm not claiming some of my kind of magical powers or anything, but I wrote some of those novels like 10 years ago or even 10, 15 years ago. A lot of the things that I wrote as kind of science fiction back in those days are actually happening today, including this business of taking people's children away from them for racial reasons. Like I say,
I believe. Well, I didn't know that was happening, but I believe that it was going to happen. And and what's the name of your book?
Well, there's 5 of them. There's a series of 5 novels. Again, probably the best thing to do would be to email me at nwnet@earthlink.net, and I will send you free PDF copies that you can read. But they're called the Northwest Independence novels. There's 5 of them. and it looks at various aspects of the way that the Northwest Republic could come into being. I don't necessarily say that it's going to happen exactly the way I say in my book, but it's a possibility. I based my novels on the personal observations I've made myself down through the years. Also, I've lived in Ireland for a number of years and in the UK when the 1990s IRA bombing campaign was going on in London, and so I've had a chance to observe up close and personal the way it's really done, put it that way, by people who are serious. So that's
very serious.
And so anyway, yeah, that's the reason I wrote those books, was to frankly answer a lot of questions that you can't really answer on a show like this without getting arrested. So and I gather Billy has done pretty much the same thing. So, and not just me. There's a guy named Gregory Kay who wrote a series of Southern independence novels. I guess I kind of got the ball rolling with my series, but that's fine with me. I mean, the more the merrier. A guy named Ward Kendall has written some of these kinds of. There's a whole school right now of white insurrectional fiction, you might call it. In fact, one of our contacts is now a PhD from a European university. I won't give his name, but he actually did his doctoral dissertation on the white fiction of the past 20 years and its implications for the political future. So, like I say, give me a shout, and I'll shoot you some copies of my books, and you can see a lot more clearly what I'm talking about.
We certainly appreciate that, and we appreciate your call, Taylor, as well. And while I know that all of us, especially the three of us, are still on the line, primarily could probably sit down and have a conversation for hours, I would want to wrap this up a little bit. But first, let me just say to both of you, I would obviously include Dr. Hill if he had not had to leave earlier, but certainly include all of us here, including those who are listening, to consider the fact that we all know that balkanization is coming. We may, have some minor disagreements about exactly how or exactly when or exactly what that will entail insofar as our people's future. We believe that white ethno-states will rise in the vacuum of federal power. And however that is to come, we are all 90% on the same page. One of the best things about this evening, and I lucked into it. I don't claim credit for having necessarily coordinated it. It just happened this way. I want to sincerely express my gratitude to both of you, to all of you, for participating. And I hope that perhaps at some occasion we could do so again in the future. I think it's very beneficial for people who are white nationalists, even for those who are still civic nationalists, to understand that this multiracial empire is going to collapse. And balkanization is inevitable. And it's actually in our people's best interest that we promote it, that we promote accelerationism, and that we try to scoot things along further to shift that Hegelian dialectic further to the right and to bring about what is coming for the best interest of our people so that hopefully our children, our grandchildren won't have to. And so, with the common really discourse that we're having and in the very civil rapport that we're developing, if you notice, none of us have raised our voices with one another. We haven't called each other bad names. None of us are in enmity. We all accept that while we may disagree on some of the finer points, we all want a good, solid future for our people where they control their destiny once again and where our enemies are crushed and destroyed. And in closing the call, I want to thank Mr. Harold Covington and Dr. Michael Hill and Tom Kawczynski for joining us, as well as all of you who have listened through the talk show format or through the YouTube live format, or those who are listening to this recording. I want to encourage you to go online and read Mr. Harold Covington's Northwest novels, which you can find on Amazon.com, I believe, and he's told you how you can email him to actually receive free PDF copies of his Northwest novels. I also encourage you that if you'd like to, you can go to Amazon.com and read my Hasten the Day trilogy about the balkanization of America, as well as my nonfiction book, The Balk, and its sequel, Ethno-State. And also, Mr. Kawczynski, I'll allow you to have the last word, if you will, by telling us about your book that you've recently authored, and tell people where they can find it, if you would.
Thanks, Billy. The book I wrote is Someone Has to Say It, The Hidden History of How America Was Lost. And for people on this call, I know you're going to be well aware of the many things that were done. But a big part of what I do is that I put the ideas out there in a way where a person who has seen nothing more than Fox News and watched talk radio can be introduced to much bigger ideas. Because I think we need to work constantly to grow our movement, to get more people aware of the plight that we face as whites here in America, and to understand that what is happening is not an accident, it is not a coincidence, it is not a matter of chance, but rather a matter of choice being used against us. And if I have one contribution to this movement beyond my work in New England, it's that I try very hard to put things out there in a way that people can enter into the movement. And I think that if you have someone in your family or in your neighborhood who you think you can bring along and you've been trying to reach, take a look at my book. It's on Amazon. And you also can reach me at nationalright.us. That's the other thing I work on. So I just want to say thank you to Billy for putting this together. Thank you to Hal for his leadership. I was listening to him long before I was involved with this, and to Dr. Hill as well, who has been a very lucid voice. You know, I feel like as all of us come together and get more people of talent and skill together, each of us is more likely to succeed. And I hope this spirit of cooperation and amity can continue and build going forward.
Absolutely. Thank you, gentlemen. And if anyone has a question for me in the future, they can email me at my email address is roper_Billy@yahoo.com. That's roper_Billy at yahoo.com. The Shieldwall Network website is available through the shieldwallnetwork.wordpress.com or through AryanWarrior.com. And my The Roper Report website is at whitenationalists.com. And for now, at least, I also have the Billy Roper YouTube channel. We'll see how that goes over the next 24 hours. But I hope that, gentlemen, you will consider joining me again in the future. I really enjoyed this conversation and our dialogue. My deepest respect to both of you, and, of course, to Dr. Hill as well. And I want to thank you for your time this evening, and thank you for everyone who listened. And with that, I wish you all a blessed evening and Hail Victory.
Okay.
Hail Victory.
Hail Victory.
Hail Victory.
Well, on behalf of the clubhouse, I'd like to thank everybody. I'm sorry I told you guys you could ask Billy a question towards the end of the show, and I don't know. I guess I was mistaken. I'm sorry. Next time around. But I'd like to say that it's been a pleasure to host this event with Billy, and I would find it equally pleasurable and an honor to host any of you others who want to put on a talk show event. And I would also like to encourage everybody to get your own TalkShoe account. And if you want to put on your own local show, go for it. I hope to someday very soon have a list of 100 different TalkShoe accounts that I follow. And ideally, the purpose in all this is to create a more cohesive white community, because communication is important, and the more we communicate, the closer we get. And that's all I have.
Thank you for your work, buddy. Appreciate it, man.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Feel
Billy,
free.
you still on there, bud?
Billy is still on the internet, but he's not on the talk side. So I imagine he can still hear us.
All right.
Anyhow,
God bless you guys, man. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Be sure to follow the clubhouse on TalkShoe, and check the schedule. Throughout the summer, the schedule's going to be sporadic because, everybody's out doing all those wonderful things that we can do when the weather's good. Towards the end of summer, we'll be going to a regularly scheduled weekly event. Sometimes it'll just be open mic, and other times we'll have hosts and people who drop in, and hopefully we'll get a kind of a cadre of regulars too. So that's it then. We're going to call it a show. I'm going to stop the recording.
Call recording has been completed.
On the TalkShoe side, and then I'm going to stop the recording on the YouTube side. Good evening, everybody.